pavement.
But their protests fell on deaf ears. The Prime Minister again insisted that he won't flinch from carrying out reforms to the welfare system and promised the disabled and others genuinely in need of benefit wouldn't lose out. Our political correspondent Tom Bradby reports.
This morning, a small group of disabled protesters mounted a militant demonstration outside the gates of Downing Street. They threw red paint at the gates and smeared it on the road outside. Their aim was to warn the government of the political costs of cutting disability benefit. Many disabled people do accept there is scope for reforming the system and certainly for eliminating fraud. But they say cutting benefits will hurt some of the poorest and most vulnerable members of society. This was designed to draw attention to the deep anger the protesters feel, many of them Labour voters.
We have always wanted to go back to work. This is why we have fought for 20 years on the streets, in the corridors of power, everywhere, to get full civil rights. The whole point of full civil rights is to get us to work, to get us into education, to get us into training, to give us decent houses, to get on the buses, to be participating members of society.
Tony Blair set out his views in an article in the Daily Mail today, trying to push forward the fact that more is now spent on the disability budget than on education in schools. But he has the opposition and members of his own party ranged against him.
We will support any reforms which build on the reforms we had introduced, but those were designed to focus help on those in greatest need and give extra help to the disabled. So we would not support reforms which slash the benefits available to people in genuine need.
If cuts have to be made, if belts have to be tightened, we don't start with people with broken backs.
But ministers say they have to think the unthinkable.
I can understand that they're apprehensive, and I'm deeply sorry about that. But we are in the middle of a review. We don't know what the outcome of that review is going to be. If we did, we wouldn't need the review.
The Prime Minister himself was in Durham today. He argues people shouldn't be surprised, since he said in opposition the priorities of government were education and tackling welfare reform. Tom Bradby, ITN, Westminster.
Well, our political editor Michael Brunson joins us now. Mike, not exactly a happy ending to the year for the government, is it?
Well, no, it isn't, but I don't think anybody should be surprised because, as Tom Bradby said, the Prime Minister always, even in opposition, said that welfare reform had to be tackled and was going to be very, very tough. The problem is, as Downing Street put it, that we are spending much more on the welfare state. We're getting less for it because so many households now, 1 in 5 households, don't have a wage earner in them. So a lot of people now are getting benefit, and it grows year after year. That's also compounded, of course, because people are living longer. As they get older, they tend to need more benefits. So this is something that any government would have to tackle. But yes, the realities of government are coming well home, I think. I think this year, you know, has proved 2 adages perhaps to be correct. One is that oppositions don't win elections, governments lose them. Well, you could argue about that one, I suppose, because although the government of the day, the Tory government earlier in this year, was in a terrible state, it was a pretty stunning win by the opposition. But the other old adage is that it's much harder to govern than oppose. And I think the government now is learning that second lesson in spades.
But I mean, when you think about it, it's only 7 months since Labour was swept to power with this vast majority, and yet the guilt seems to be coming off the image pretty quickly. Is it a surprise to you that it's been such a rapid process?
Well, frankly, it isn't, because if you look at the business of governing, it is always a very, very tough business to run the country, particularly in the late 20th century. I mean, just look at the other things, that because we are now focused this particular week on the problem of benefits, we've almost, haven't we, forgotten about things that were just sort of a matter of days ago. The Geoffrey Robinson affair, the Formula One affair. Look at, for example, the potential fuss there was going to be about the loss of mining jobs. And so I think modern government means that all these things, day after day, week after week, press in, and they are pressing in on this government, as of course they did on previous Tory and previous Labour governments.
Well, Tony Blair's sitting on this huge majority, but do you think there's any dangers for him in being so tough with his own party?
Well, there is a theory, of course, that he is being tough now to be perhaps a little less tough later on. I think there is the realization that they've got to get on with some of the really big issues. Now, for example, education. There is a clear promise there that they are going to get class sizes down. But to do that, you've got to get the money in. And as there's a delay as the money comes in from the other various savings that they've made, or the windfall tax and so on. It takes time, and a government only has 5 years, 4 years probably, if you think of perhaps the possibility of Tony Blair wanting to go early, so he's got to get a move on.
What about the opposition? We haven't mentioned them yet. How do they stand at the end of the year? And I suppose the key question is there one?
There is an opposition. The Conservatives, though, have the difficulty because they see the government tackling problems in very much the way that they themselves would have tackled them. And as one former cabinet minister said to me the other day, it's jolly hard to oppose in that sense. But the Liberal Democrats, of course, say that the government should be much, much more radical. They think that there are ways of finding money and spending it. And there is a certain truth that in the House of Commons, it's the Liberal Democrats perhaps who are scoring as many, perhaps more points than the Conservatives.
Mike Bronson, thanks very much indeed.
British beef farmers who've been hit by...
Eurofighter has finally got off the ground with the signing of a contract committing Britain to producing the plane with 3 European partners. In Bonn to sign the contract, the Defence Secretary glossed over Eurofighter's very long and very expensive development. George Robertson shook hands on a deal which he says will give Britain the right plane at the right price.
The Eurofighter was designed from the outset as a versatile, agile, multi-role aircraft and is ideally suited to meet the new turbulent challenges to peace which have replaced the threat that we faced from the Warsaw Pact.
Certainly around 80,000 British jobs rely on Eurofighter, but at what cost? Delays, design changes and political dithering have pushed the total bill for the project to more than £40 billion.
Well, there's no doubt the cost has actually caused some problems with the other services. The Navy and the Army have both been concerned at the high cost and the emphasis that's being put on Eurofighter. But I think that in terms of the spin-off that the industry will get, and sealing Britain's part in this as the leading shareholder for the future of the aerospace industry in the UK and in Europe for that matter, being a competitor to the United States, this has been a very important project.
It will at least provide the RAF with the world's most advanced fighter, but even Eurofighter's performance and cost will be overshadowed early in the next century by an American challenger, the F-22. Howell Jones, ITN.
Still to come in